The ballroom shimmered with gold light and restless ambition, a place where multi-million-dollar deals were usually sealed with confident smiles and firm handshakes. Until the moment Victoria Hale, the famously glamorous but notoriously icy CEO of Nextsite Analytics, recoiled from a simple greeting. Elijah Ward approached her circle with calm assurance, extending his hand politely, but Victoria's expression shifted from mild annoyance to cold disdain as she stepped back and clasped both hands behind her, as if touching him would contaminate her status. Conversation stalled. Glasses froze midair. Hundreds of eyes turned to witness the humiliation. Victoria gave a brittle smile and said she didn't shake hands with people who clearly know nothing about sophisticated algorithms, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Elijah kept his composure, but the insult echoed across the silent ballroom. And then, phones lifted, recording. A moment that should have been harmless transformed into something irreversible. But rewind 48 hours, and the impending disaster had already been brewing beneath the glitter. Victoria had awakened in her penthouse, convinced she still had time to save her crumbling empire. Investor meetings were dropping like flies. Her CFO was calling nonstop about burn rate, and the board demanded a miracle. Dressed in couture, she marched into the conference determined to charm her way back into relevance. Meanwhile, across town, Elijah Ward started his morning in quiet contrast. No designer suit, no entourage, just a black shirt, jeans, and a billionaire's mind disguised behind modest simplicity. Founder of Ward Equity Group, MIT-trained, self-made, respected, he chose understatement because it revealed people's true colors. When he entered the ballroom later, he watched Victoria from afar, her dismissive gestures, her impatient tone with staff, the way she seemed to judge every person by shoes and surname. Still, he gave her the benefit of the doubt. He approached kindly, ready to discuss Nextsite's technology, prepared even to overlook the rumors about her leadership. Instead, she mistook him for a server, ordered him to fetch champagne, then laughed when he corrected her. The executives around her chuckled awkwardly, unsure whether to step in or stay silent. Victoria leaned closer, whispering something about conferences lowering standards to let anyone wander in. Elijah swallowed the sting, maintained grace, and reintroduced himself with quiet dignity, only for Victoria to reject him again, this time publicly, viciously, and with the unmistakable tone of someone who believed status equaled superiority. The moment her hand refused his, the room shifted. Investors exchanged uneasy glances. Someone whispered his name. Someone else gasped. Within minutes, 3 entrepreneurs Googled him and went pale. The clip hit social media before Elijah had even walked away. A journalist tweeted, "CEO refuses to shake a black investor's hand at global tech conference," and the view count spiked like a detonating firework. Still, Elijah didn't escalate. He simply said, "I hope your presentation goes well," with the grace of someone who didn't need to prove his worth. As he stepped back into the crowd, Victoria laughed loudly, brushing him off as unqualified. But across the ballroom, investors were already murmuring, calculating, deciding. Something irreversible had begun. Victoria, oblivious and arrogant, believed she had dismissed a nobody. But she had actually dismissed the only person capable of writing the $150 million check that could save her dying company. As the buzz around the room tightened into a storm, Elijah quietly messaged his partner, "Cancel the Nextsite deal." Toxic leadership confirmed. The fallout began faster than anyone in that chandelier-lit ballroom could comprehend. As Victoria Hale adjusted her microphone and prepared to present to what she assumed would be a captivated audience, the conference screens around the room began quietly flashing notifications, tweets, reposts, reactions multiplying by the second as the video of her refusing Elijah Ward's handshake exploded across the internet. Investors who had been ready to listen now stared at their phones, whispering, forwarding the clip, shaking their heads. Within minutes, the ballroom energy shifted, chairs emptied, the hum of conversation grew uneasy, and a subtle current of judgment swept through the crowd. Yet Victoria, confident in her delusion, strutted onto the stage believing she still commanded respect. Her first slides lit up, exaggerated revenue projections, and polished taglines. But investors were no longer looking at the screen. They were looking at her, comparing the polished corporate image she projected to the woman sneering on their phones. One young investor stood up mid-slide and walked out. Then another. Then 5 more. Victoria noticed the movement but forced a tight smile, assuming they were heading to more interesting sessions. Meanwhile, in the hallways, clusters of attendees gathered around glowing screens, playing back the viral moment frame by frame. Victoria recoiling, clasping her hands behind her back, dismissing Elijah with a condescending smile. The clip wasn't just embarrassing, it was damning. It didn't read as a misunderstanding. It read as prejudice, entitlement, and arrogance wrapped into one polished package. Back inside, Victoria attempted to answer questions with defensive sharpness. When someone asked about next site's diversity metrics, she brushed it off with a smug comment about hiring the best, not filling quotas, earning another wave of uncomfortable shifting and yet more walkouts. Her CFO, standing at the edge of the stage, desperately signaled for her to check her phone, but she waved him away, refusing to acknowledge anything was wrong. Meanwhile, Elijah, seated quietly in the back row, observed the unraveling with a calm that seemed almost prophetic. He hadn't planned to embarrass her, yet she was doing it all on her own, unraveling thread by thread under the weight of her own arrogance. Out in the networking hall, executives whispered urgently, "She insulted him? Does she know who he is?" He was their only shot at survival. Journalists typed furiously, shaping narratives that would soon race across the internet. Clients called their offices, asking if Next Site's values aligned with theirs. Investors sent hurried emails withdrawing interest. Victoria's assistant, pale and trembling, tried once more to interrupt her, whispering, "Please, you really need to see what's happening online." But Victoria snapped back, "Stop being dramatic." That sentence alone would be replayed later as the world saw the full scope of her obliviousness. When the presentation finally ended, the applause was thin, scattered, nearly pitying. Victoria walked off stage expecting congratulations, only to be met with her CFO, thrusting a phone inches from her face. "Look," he insisted, voice cracking. She finally saw the video, millions of views already. Her own smirk, her own dismissiveness, the stunned silence of the room preserved forever. Her stomach dropped. The color drained from her face. She scrolled further and found former employees speaking out, sharing stories of being overlooked, underpaid, dismissed, criticized for not fitting the culture. Every post gained traction, credibility, momentum. Companies that had previously scheduled meetings with her now sent curt cancellation messages, citing brand alignment concerns. Investors she'd been chasing for months issued public statements distancing themselves from her leadership. Within hours, Next Site's internal Slack channels filled with panic, speculation, and screenshots. And in a quiet hotel business center, Elijah sent one more message to his partner, "Stand by for tomorrow. The industry needs to hear this." As night fell, the conference murmured with one electrifying realization. The mystery investor everyone had been hoping to meet, the man whose fund controlled billions, was not only present, but had been the very man Victoria humiliated. She, however, still didn't know the truth. She thought she had offended a minor player. The universe had arranged a reckoning far larger than she imagined. And by the time the sun rose for the next day's keynote, the entire tech world would be waiting. Phones charged, eyes sharp, ready to witness how justice would unfold. The ballroom the next morning felt electric, charged with anticipation as nearly every seat filled long before the keynote began. Journalists lined the aisles, cameras ready, commentators whispering predictions, and investors crowded the entryways just to secure standing room. Everyone sensed something monumental was about to unfold. In the far back corner, disguised beneath a baseball cap and oversized sunglasses, Victoria Hale sat trembling, her once impeccable confidence now hollowed into dread. She had spent the entire night fielding frantic calls from the board, losing clients one after another, and watching her company's public image collapse in real time. But nothing prepared her for the moment the conference organizer stepped on stage and announced the keynote speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice trembling with excitement, "please welcome a visionary, founder of Ward Equity Group, one of the most influential investors of our era, Elijah Ward." The room erupted into thunderous applause so powerful it vibrated the floor. And then he walked on stage, calm, grounded, dignified, wearing the same simple black shirt and jeans that Victoria had mocked the day before. Victoria froze. Her stomach twisted. Her breath caught in her throat. The man she had treated like an unqualified outsider, the man she refused to shake hands with, was the very investor she had been desperately trying to impress for months. Her CFO leaned in, whispering with defeated horror, "He's the mystery investor. He's the one who could have saved us." But Elijah had already turned his attention to the crowd. The applause softened, the cameras lifted, and complete silence filled the ballroom. Elijah began speaking with a calm resonance that commanded the room effortlessly. He spoke about the power of ethical leadership, about the responsibility investors hold, about the persistent and often invisible bias in the tech world, bias that suffocates talent before it ever has a chance to bloom. He didn't mention Victoria by name, yet every example, every phrase, every pointed pause mirrored the humiliation she had inflicted the day before. He spoke of being underestimated, judged on appearance rather than intellect, dismissed before speaking a word. The audience nodded knowingly, shifting their eyes toward the back where Victoria tried to shrink into her seat. Screens behind Elijah displayed logos of billion-dollar companies he had backed, industries he had reshaped, and founders he had elevated. Each slide was another nail in the coffin of Victoria's arrogance. When he said, "The worst mistake any leader can make is judging a book by its cover. You never know who you're speaking to," the crowd's murmur was unmistakable. They knew. Everyone knew. And Victoria felt every syllable like a blow to the chest. As Elijah spoke about investing only in companies whose leadership embodied integrity and respect, Victoria realized with crushing clarity that she had not only lost his support, she had ensured he would never consider her again. The applause that followed his keynote was immense, a roaring wave of approval, admiration, and collective agreement that the industry was ready for change. Elijah exited the stage surrounded instantly by investors eager to speak with him, but Victoria pushed her way through, desperate and breathless. "Mr. Ward, Elijah, please," she stammered, stepping into his path. "There's been a misunderstanding. I didn't know who you were. I was stressed. The clip looks worse than it was. Please, just one meeting." Elijah paused, studied her with quiet steadiness, then shook his head. His voice remained soft but final. "Leadership is shown in how you treat people when you think they're no one to you. You showed me everything I needed to know." She reached for another plea, but he had already turned, surrounded by allies, his dignity forming a shield she could not penetrate. As the hallway hummed with new funding conversations she was no longer part of, Victoria stood alone, trembling, the realization carving itself into her spirit. She had not simply made a mistake, she had revealed herself. And the consequences were only beginning. The storm that followed Elijah's keynote did not fade. It intensified, tightening around Victoria Hale with the precision of a noose. Days after the conference, the viral clip still dominated headlines, but now dozens of ex-employees were adding their voices, transforming the incident from a personal embarrassment into an industry-shaking scandal. By the time the EEOC announced a formal investigation, the tech world was glued to every update. The morning of the press briefing, reporters crowded the federal building steps as officials revealed what their probes uncovered: 5 years of hiring discrepancies, pay gaps, internal emails implying cultural fit, concerns for minority candidates, and promotion trails that inexplicably favored executives who resembled Victoria herself. Screens displayed charts showing nearly half of qualified applicants had been people of color, while a mere handful were ever hired. As journalists scribbled notes and cameras flashed, the tech community collectively realized this wasn't a one-time lapse. This was a system Victoria had built and protected. Lawsuits followed immediately. Former employees, once afraid to speak, now stepped forward with unwavering determination. One engineer recounted being told her natural hair seemed unprofessional. Another revealed being paid far less than a less qualified colleague. Another shared how leadership dismissed diversity concerns as a distraction. Each testimony intensified public outrage. Victoria watched it unfold from her lawyer's office, shrinking deeper into her chair with every headline. "They're exaggerating," she insisted weakly, but even she could hear how hollow her voice sounded. The trial began months later under a media spotlight that burned relentlessly. In the courtroom, Victoria's polished persona dissolved under scrutiny. Emails she once typed carelessly were now displayed on towering screens, her own phrasing, vague enough to deny yet pointed enough to reveal bias, echoing across the silent chamber. Prosecutors methodically connected her actions, the handshake incident, the hiring records, the cultural fit comments, the dismissals, the pay disparities. And then, on the fourth day, Elijah took the stand. He didn't raise his voice or dramatize his experience. He simply described the moment she recoiled from his hand, the sting of being dismissed based on appearance, and the brief flash of self-doubt he felt despite all he had achieved. "These moments accumulate," he said softly. "You begin to wonder if excellence will ever be enough to be seen clearly." His testimony struck the jury harder than any statistic. Victoria's defense scrambled, insisting she was under stress, that the video lacked context, that she had misunderstood the situation. But every attempt melted under the weight of her own documented decisions. When the prosecutor asked her directly why she had called security on Elijah, she muttered vague excuses about feeling uncomfortable, yet she could not articulate why. The silence that followed exposed more truth than her lawyer could ever repair. Deliberation was swift. The jury returned with a decisive verdict: guilty on all counts of workplace discrimination, misconduct, and violating federal civil protections. Gasps rippled through the gallery as the judge delivered the sentence: fines, personal liability, years of barred corporate involvement, and a period of federal custody. Victoria swayed, gripping the defendant's table as if the wood itself might anchor her. She had entered the courtroom believing she could argue her way out. She walked out realizing the world had finally seen her without the armor of wealth or status. Outside, the plaintiffs stood together on the courthouse steps, speaking with confidence and relief. They were no longer former employees. They were victors reclaiming their dignity. And though Elijah quietly slipped away from the cameras, the message of his calm testimony lingered. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it arrives in the steady voice of someone who refuses to shrink beneath prejudice. In the months following the verdict, the tech world seemed to reorganize itself around the shockwave Victoria Hale had created, but not in the way she imagined. While she quietly faded into the background, stripped of titles, reputation, and influence, the people who had once suffered under her leadership began to rise in ways she never believed they could. Her name had become a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms, but theirs became stories of resilience and rebirth. Elijah Ward, now hailed as a voice of principled leadership, launched the Unity Capital Fund, a $500 million initiative investing specifically in founders from underrepresented backgrounds. The industry watched in fascination as the fund rapidly attracted attention not because of pity or politics, but because the founders backed by Elijah were simply brilliant. Among them was Jasmine Reed, the former marketing manager Victoria once dismissed for not fitting the culture. Using her settlement money and a sharp vision, Jasmine built a recruiting platform designed to eliminate bias in hiring. Elijah saw her pitch, recognized its necessity, and became her lead investor. Within months, her company expanded from a small apartment office to a thriving campus employing dozens of people whose potential had long been ignored by the traditional tech pipeline. Each press interview she gave, each product launch she celebrated, served as a living rebuke to the world that once underestimated her. Meanwhile, Michael Lowe, the engineer repeatedly passed over for promotions at Next Site, finally stepped into the leadership role he had always deserved. Backed by Unity Capital, he launched an innovative AI firm focused on ethical machine learning, a topic he had once tried to introduce at Next Site before being brushed off. His new team, intentionally diverse, thrived under a culture that valued ideas over appearances. Michael often said the greatest revenge against discrimination was success built on integrity. And then there was Carlos Ramirez, the developer once underpaid by tens of thousands simply because Victoria doubted client relatability. After the trial, he was recruited by a top tech company that recognized his talent instantly. Within 6 months, he rose to director-level leadership, mentoring young Ladix engineers entering an industry that desperately needed representation. He donated part of his settlement to scholarships for students who might have otherwise been barred from opportunity. As these individuals rebuilt their lives, Victoria spiraled downward. She attempted a rebrand, writing essays about growth and reflection, but every publication refused to feature her. She applied for consulting roles, but HR departments Googled her name and immediately declined. Eventually, she took a customer service job under an assumed last name, hoping anonymity might soften the sting. Yet every time someone glanced too long, she feared recognition. The life she once dominated with entitlement had shrunk to a narrow corridor of regret. Meanwhile, Elijah's mission only grew. His fund's portfolio companies flourished, not because they were charity projects, but because talent thrives where dignity is protected. Investors who once hesitated now lined up, eager to participate in the movement Elijah had ignited. Major conferences adopted new standards for inclusive leadership, nicknamed the Hail Clause, ensuring that CEOs who displayed patterns of prejudice would be barred from future speaking stages. Across the industry, whispers shifted. Instead of asking who belongs here, people now asked, whose voice haven't we heard yet? And with every success story, every new founder empowered through Unity Capital, it became clearer that the downfall of Victoria Hale had not been an ending. It had been a beginning, a reset, a reminder that arrogance collapses empires, but character builds legacies. And as Elijah prepared for the annual Tech Diversity Summit, where his new fund would unveil its next generation of rising leaders, one truth echoed through the industry. The world had moved forward, not by erasing the pain of discrimination, but by rebuilding something stronger in its place. The Tech Diversity Summit was unlike any conference the industry had seen before. 2,000 founders, investors, engineers, students, and storytellers gathered in a space that felt more like a movement than an event. The air buzzed not with competition, but with possibility, a palpable sense that the future of technology was shifting towards something broader, fairer, and infinitely more creative than what had come before. Cameras lined the back wall, capturing the moment as Elijah Ward stepped onto the stage to a standing ovation that seemed to lift the entire room. The same man who once stood quietly in a ballroom while being dismissed had become a symbol of dignity, strength, and patient triumph. Behind him, the towering screen displayed photos of the 50 founders funded through Unity Capital, smiling teams, diverse boards, groundbreaking innovations, all results of a mission forged not from anger, but from clarity. Elijah began his keynote with his signature calm, thanking the crowd before speaking about how easily prejudice hides behind professionalism, how often talent is overlooked because of unspoken bias, and how essential it is for leaders to dismantle those barriers. As he spoke, the audience grew silent, absorbing every word like oxygen. He told them that justice is not always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet refusal to accept disrespect, a steady commitment to integrity, a willingness to build what others tried to deny. He didn't mention Victoria Hale by name, but the contrast between the world before her downfall and the world now unfolding before them was unmistakable. Jasmine Reed sat in the third row, her startup now valued at tens of millions. Her eyes glistened as Elijah spoke about reclaiming spaces once closed to people like her. Michael Lowe nodded thoughtfully from 2 rows back, already mentoring a new generation of engineers. Carlos Ramirez tuned in remotely, his own team cheering from their company headquarters. These people had once been dismissed as not fitting the culture. Now they were defining it. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Victoria watched the live stream on a cheap tablet during her break at the retail job she never imagined she'd hold. She stared blankly at the screen as Elijah celebrated the achievements of the very employees she had once underestimated. The applause echoing through the summit felt like a verdict she was forced to hear again and again. She tried to close the app, but her fingers hesitated. She knew, with a dull ache, that everything happening on that stage was the direct consequence of a single moment when she allowed arrogance to guide her. Her world had shattered, theirs had grown. Back at the summit, Elijah shifted into his closing message, a speech that would later be clipped, shared, quoted, and replayed across social media. To anyone who has ever been judged before speaking, overlooked despite excellence, or told they don't belong, remember this: your worth is not defined by someone else's blindness. Excellence is the best response to prejudice. Every door they close is an invitation to build your own. The room erupted in applause so powerful it drowned out even the sound of cameras. People stood, tears in their eyes, feeling not just inspired but seen. The screen behind Elijah flashed a final message inviting viewers to share their own stories, to amplify voices long ignored, to keep the movement alive beyond the summit walls. As the lights rose and conversations filled the hall, it became clear that this was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of a legacy. A legacy born from justice, strengthened by resilience, and carried by every person who chose empathy over ego, integrity over image, and character over convenience. And as Elijah stepped off the stage, greeted by founders who looked at him not as an investor, but as proof of what dignity can accomplish, one truth echoed across the industry. Prejudice might spark a fall, but purpose builds an empire that lasts.